Political leaders have lined up to tell New Zealand Business how their party intends to steward this country through the economic crisis, including a plan from Labour to loosen some restrictions at the border. COVID-19 continues to cast a shadow over the election campaign, touching every area of government and every New Zealander. Business New Zealand held a virtual conference today to give leaders the opportunity to spell out their plan for the coming years. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, was there and she filed this report.
Well, hi everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. I know you're there somewhere, but down the other end. It's amazing how we've got so used
National's Judith Collins was one of several leaders to lay out their remedy. She's calling for a halt to the massive borrowing program that's resulted in billions of dollars being pumped into the economy.
It's a $29 billion in additional borrowing, equal, bringing it back to hospitals, the building of 50 new hospitals. It's that big for us, and we cannot continue to have this line of economic morphine in our bloodstreams anymore.
Ms Collins says the money already borrowed on behalf of New Zealanders must be spent wisely.
My plea is that we don't just spend. My plea is that we borrow as though we would for our own businesses, that we borrow to build. We borrow to build an economy, we borrow to build a future, and we borrow to build productivity.
Greens co-leader James Shaw says today's politicians have a responsibility to tomorrow's taxpayers.
To ensure that every dollar that we can of that stimulus goes towards resolving some of those long-term challenges, particularly in the fields of our built environment and infrastructure. It does mean that our infrastructure companies are going to have to retool so that they're not just building four-lane motorways in a very few parts of the country.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters outlined his prescription for future success.
And if we're going to go into this election with mindless and, dare I say it, inexperienced, extreme ideology, then we're going to face a disaster. As I said, don't let them stuff the country.
Even if New Zealand returns to the relative normalcy of level 1, the ongoing closure of the border continues to have a substantial impact on many sectors, like tourism and education. ACT leader David Seymour says this country should not have a blanket approach to allowing people from elsewhere into New Zealand.
At present, we spend far too much time treating people from every destination the same, when we know there are countries with COVID and countries without, countries with good public health and countries without. We need to start being strategic and going country by country.
Labour leader Jacinda Ardern acknowledged border settings need to be constantly reviewed, unveiling a plan to loosen restrictions if re-elected.
Our plan is to reserve 10% of places at our managed isolation and quarantine facilities for workers critical to New Zealand industry and our economic recovery. Our plan to keep New Zealand moving requires us to position ourselves globally as a place to trade and invest in, a place where we intend to bounce back faster, with an economy that is more open than many other countries.
Speaking to reporters afterwards, she said the fact New Zealand's in a position to be looking at this is significant. As Ardern says, while there's no plan to allow large numbers of foreign students back in this year, some could come back to New Zealand under the new rules.
We are ready and willing to have a conversation within that 10% around the international student market. It is fair to say, though, it could not accommodate the totality, because that was the equivalent of tens of thousands of individuals. But there are those who, for instance, are working in the postgraduate environment where there is additional extra justification for wanting to gain access, and we will work through that with our education institutions as well.
Ms Ardern also said Labour would work on an investment plan alongside the ongoing trade program to encourage foreign capital into New Zealand. National's announcement on the campaign trail today was a pledge to make electric cars cheaper and to quadruple the number of the vehicles on the road by 2033. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.